Hello there, folks. Before I get started, I want to mention a few things. On Sunday, I am part of a thing called Kaiju Masterclass, in which I will be talking about my work with Tsuburaya Productions and Ultraman and Godzilla and all of that stuff. So if you're interested in such things, I'll put a link below to go there. It's an online convention, no charge to be there. I'm on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. The thing goes Saturday and Sunday. Speaking of Saturday, we are having our monthly all-day so-called Zazen from 10 to around 2 p.m. Pacific time. Everybody's invited to join. It's online again, no charge to participate. We do ask for a donation, but if you can't donate, that's fine. And our retreat, you can join on Zoom this year as first weekend of November. It'll be a nice relief from everything else going on in November, I think. So you're also invited to join that. Links below on how to get there and what to do. Okay, good. Thanks a lot for joining me. And today's topic is going to be the role of the intellect in Zen practice, because somebody asked for it. And by the way, if you ask for something in the comments, I always pay attention to those, but I often forget that somebody asked for something. So ask again, if there's something you want to hear about, ask a second time if I haven't done it yet. All right, intellect in Zen. Well, what can we say about the intellect in Zen? There's a few stories I can pull out, or I have pulled out from the literature. Here's one that I'm sure is somewhere in Shobo Genzo proper, but I could only find a footnote about it when I went through the PDF file looking for keywords. Anyway, but here's the story as told by Nishijima Roshi in a footnote, and I'm sure that Dogen tells this in Shobo Genzo proper in his own words, but here we go. A young monk wanted to play a joke on a stupid old monk who lived in the Buddha's order. So he led the old monk into a dark room and hit him with a ball, saying, "You have got the first effect." And the first effect is they used to rank the levels of meditation back in those days. Well, they still do in some forms of Buddhism, but not the Zen form. Anyway, that's the first effect. That's all you need to know. He hit him again and said, "You have got the second effect." Then he hit him a third time and said, "You have got the third effect." Finally, he hit him one last time and said, "You have got the fourth effect." Strangely, when the old man came out of the dark room, he had actually experienced the fourth effect. Shika, the fourth effect, refers to the state of an arhat, that is, the ultimate state in Hinayana Buddhism. That's so-called Hinayana Buddhism. Some people find that term offensive, but it means the early forms of Buddhism. So that story is sometimes held out to show that the intellectual understanding of Buddhism isn't necessary for enlightenment, so-called enlightenment, for a real, fully body-mind understanding. That's something that Dogen points out a lot, that when you understand Buddhism, that is, when you become enlightened in some people's terminology, it is a state that involves both body and mind. So it's not just a mental state. It's not an intellectual understanding. It is a visceral understanding with the body and the mind. And here's a few things that Dogen says about the intellect. Actually, the first one comes from another footnote of Nishijima Roshi, and I'll just read what Nishijima Roshi says, explaining what Dogen says. Reality includes all things and phenomena without separation, but if we try to understand it intellectually, we lose the state of reality completely. And here's a quote from Bendowa, which is one of Dogen's most famous works, The Wholehearted Way, it's sometimes called. We should cease the intellectual work of studying sayings and chasing words. We should learn the backward step of turning light and reflecting. Body and mind will naturally fall away, and the original features, or original face, will manifest themselves before us. If we want to attain the matter of the ineffable, we should practice the matter of the ineffable at once. And that's Inmo is the ineffable, it, in case you're following along. I won't explain that because that would take a whole other video. Now here's another quote from Bendowa, and this is a bit long, so here we go. We should remember that from the beginning we have never lacked the supreme state of Bodhi, that's enlightenment, and we will receive it and use it forever. At the same time, because we cannot perceive it directly, we are prone to beget random intellectual ideas, and because we chase after these as if they were real things, we vainly pass by the great state of truth. From these intellectual ideas emerge all sorts of flowers in space. Flowers in space is delusion, and it's based on the idea of seeing imaginary flowers floating in space. We think about the 12-fold cycle, the pratitya samutpada, the 12-fold chain of codependent co-origination, and the 25 spheres of existence, and ideas of the 3 vehicles and 5 vehicles, or of having Buddha nature or not having Buddha nature, are endless. Grammatically weird, but you get it. We should not think that the learning of these intellectual ideas is the right path of Buddhist practice. When we solely sit in zazen, on the other hand, relying now on exactly the same posture as the Buddha and letting go of the myriad things, then we go beyond the areas of delusion, realization, emotion, and consideration, and we are not concerned with the ways of the common and the sacred. At once we are roaming outside the intellectual frame, receiving and using the great state of Bodhi, enlightenment. How could those caught in the trap of words compare with this? Caught in the trap of words is again a diss on people who are overly intellectual. Now, having said all that, I want to show you something. I brought out a prop for today's lesson. So don't say I never did anything. Every time I move this table, the thing that my camera is on shakes, so I'm sorry, it looks like we're having another earthquake here in California. But here is Shobogenzo in English translation. This is, Dogen lived to be 53 years old, or 54, depending on how you calculate his age, which is 2 years younger than me, or 3 years younger than me, depending on how you calculate my age. So he wrote Shobogenzo between the time he was in his late 20s and when he died at age 53. So there's Shobogenzo. He didn't just write that, though. He also wrote Eihei Koroku, and this is a translation of Eihei Koroku, big, thick book. This contains both Eihei Koroku itself and the poems that Dogen wrote that aren't collected in Shobogenzo. So this is not Shobogenzo, this is more stuff. This is Shobogenzo's Wee Monkey, which a lot of people confuse with Shobogenzo. This wasn't actually written by Dogen, but it is a compilation of things that Eijo, one of his students, heard from Dogen and remembered and kind of put together after Dogen was gone. And more Dogen's writings are contained. Dogen's Pure Standards of the Zen Community. This is Eihei Shingi, it's called. It's his monk's rules, and they're collected in another book. So Dogen, the guy who said you shouldn't be intellectual, wrote all this stuff. So this is something to kind of notice. There is... people tend to go from one extreme to the other with this stuff, and that's always a problem. So one of the things that's happened with Zen is because the first people who got interested in Zen in the US and Europe and Australia and places like that, the English-speaking world or the non-Asian language-speaking world, were intellectuals, university people, professors, and so they would tend to put their stamp on Zen as an intellectual thing. Well, those were actually the first kinds of people, among the first kinds of people who got interested in it in China and Japan, but it's been around for hundreds of years in China and Japan, and what you find in Chinese and Japanese and probably Korean and Thai and other forms of Zen is the intellectual side is not the be-all and end-all the way it tends to be in America and Europe. So a lot of people practice Zen and do whatever rituals are around Zen without really ever bothering to read these books that I just held up for you, these Dogen books, and to get really intellectual about it. So there's a tendency by English-speaking people and other European language-speaking people to get very, very intellectual with the Zen stuff. Then there's the other tendency of people who read the books or read those statements that I just read to you at the beginning, and read some of these books, and completely diss all of it and say, well, yeah, we don't need to worry about that intellectual stuff anymore. It's all non-intellectual. We're gonna be free of that. And they burn their sutras and whatever. I mean, that's a traditional thing. I don't know if anybody really sets fire to these kind of books like this, but anyway, that's kind of the image. So you don't want to go either of these ways. The intellect is something we're stuck with, whether we want it or not. As animals, it is our main way of surviving. Other animals have other ways of surviving. You know, Ziggy the dog, I don't know if he would survive at all in the wild. He's kind of a little dog. But his forebears had big claws and big teeth, and they could survive that way. And also they were smart enough to pair up with humans, and humans were smart enough to pair up with dogs, and that's a whole interesting story about how that happened. And some people say that humans only really survived because we paired up with dogs. I don't know a whole lot about that, but I think that's a really interesting idea. Anyway, other animals have other ways to survive, is the point. Our main way of surviving is through our smarts. That's the one major advantage we have over other animals, and for thousands and thousands of years, much longer than recorded history, that is how we survived, by just being smarter than other animals. Then gradually we built up this crazy, amazing civilization, also based on how smart we are. We invented things like computers, like what you're probably watching this video on, and writing books, and farming, and, you know, all sorts of things. And by that point, we got really, really stuck in our intellectual side. And that is about the time when Buddha came along, and when some of these other teachers who taught similar things came along and said, we have to stop relying solely on the intellect, and we have to try to stop figuring out everything by the intellect. This is the trap that you get into with Zen sometimes, is you trying to figure it out. And I get trapped in this myself, and I always have to remind myself that that's not where this is going. The intellect is very good at sort of pointing you in the right direction if you work at it. It can point you in the million wrong directions, but it can help point you in the right direction too, which is why Dogen bothered with writing all this stuff, you know, because he was trying to point us in the right direction. But you don't really need all this stuff. You don't really need to know all this stuff. It's just something to try to point you in the right direction, and ultimately you're going to have to forget it. When you do Zazen, for example, you have to forget about any ideas you have about what Zazen is supposed to be, and that gets very tricky. Boy, that is a hard subject to talk about, and I feel like the brevity of these videos doesn't give me a chance to do it justice, but I think maybe I've made a couple of points, and we can talk about it later if people want to. If you want me to make more points and more videos, you can send me a donation at the link you're seeing below on your screen, or in the video description section of YouTube. It has direct links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. That is how I make my living. That's how I make most of my money, and buy Ziggy food, and buy Three Stooges t-shirts and everything. Well, I buy more food than t-shirts, but anyway, that's how I do it. If you're having trouble financially, don't donate to me, because I'm not like, I'm desperate. But the reason I'm not desperate is because you people keep donating to me, and I thank you very much, and I really appreciate that, and it's been great. So thank you very much. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.